record. Um, yeah, so I suppose the first thing when we're considering off season is people taking a bit of downtime. Do you have any particular goals, rules, any advice you give to people about when they do want a little bit of time off? Or do you advise them to take a bit of time off, or do you just let them carry on if they want to?
Yeah. I suppose it depends on each individual and sort of their normal routine. But I generally try and advise, the a basic advice I would give is try and have 2 weeks off. And some people come back to me and go, well, I'll have 2 weeks off over Christmas or whatever it
Yeah,
is. But I think that's fine. Like as long as you can go in the next few months in the winter period. If I can have 2 weeks where I'm not really thinking about triathlon, because we all know that triathlon's quite a sport that you have to think about a lot, and
yeah,
and people get obsessed with it, which is great, but I think that can take its toll over a number of
yeah,
years. So actually having a mental and physical break, I think is pretty key, really. And also like I think, when we coach people, sometimes that relationship can feel quite intense, or always speaking to them or commenting on training peaks
yeah,
or whatever. For them to have like nothing on training peaks for a few weeks is actually probably not a bad thing. And quite often I'll go, if you want to do an easy run here and there, go and do it. You don't need me
yeah,
to do
yeah,
that. But really just have that sort of 2 weeks really as a minimum, I would say. Some people
yeah.
just don't like it at all, and some people want a little bit more. So I think it just depends on whoever that is. But
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah,
again, because we're being paid to provide a service as well, we can obviously just provide a very basic structure that
yeah,
doesn't need to be led by data, and it can, athletes can be, advised they can move sessions around and they can be very flexible with it. And if they don't do it, we're not going to take it personally because
absolutely.
we've kind of said it's their plan, and yeah, so we can be just very vague in the planning, can't we? Just to guide them in just a rough roundabout way, and then
Yeah.
at least they've still got some structure if they do want to keep some routine in their lives, which a lot of people enjoy, I think.
Yeah, and quite often the basic structure I'll have is I'll put like generally I try and keep running in. That's probably the one that I would
Yeah,
keep in mainly from an injury point of view, and also from that it's just really easy. You can just head out of your door and not really
yeah,
think about it, And as an advice, I'd probably go do three 20 to 30 minute easy runs
yeah,
a week, or even within that 2 weeks. One, because it's nice to get out, and two, from a loading point of view, as we've talked about in previous sessions, that actually we're trying to keep running loading relatively constant
yeah,
rather than those big spikes. And if you do nothing for 2, 3 weeks and then, right, I'm motivated now, I want to get back into it, you get away with that with swimming and biking for most people. But running, you often
yeah,
see actually, and the biggest spike of injuries I see from coaching elite athletes is actually in November because of that reason.
yeah,
Um, so I now go, right, if you're used to running quite a bit, maybe just do a couple of easy runs. It doesn't matter when it is,
no,
just
no.
when you've got time to fit it in. So that's sometimes what I'll try and advise.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of research across multiple sports about those injury prevention strategies in the off season. I suppose for elites it can be more of a factor because they run such a high volume and they're
Yeah,
so cardiovascularly fit and mentally strong. If they were to take, like a typical rugby season, let's say with a 6 week off period for all the professional teams like rugby
yeah,
league or whatever, if they did absolutely nothing and then came back to the first week of training and the coaching staff would say, right, we've really got to flog you to get you fit again now, the,
yeah,
the
yeah,
injury rates would be
yeah,
absolutely massive. And with your guys as well, they're so mentally tough, they're so physically able and cardiovascularly strong, but the chassis of the bodywork kind of deteriorated even within 4, 5, 6 weeks, and they won't feel any different internally. And they might try to hit paces they previously hit, just to reassure them that they're still fit. And you could easily come into a lot of problems if that was the case.
yeah. No, definitely. And I think even that, even from an age group perspective, even if you're running 3 times a week, four
Yeah,
times a week, it's still quite a lot.
yeah,
Especially if you're adding a long run in there and you're doing an hour to 90 minutes
yeah,
and you're doing a session a week. The loading is decent, and you've accumulated a lot of uh, yeah, fatigue and
yeah,
if you suddenly just take that out, the loading goes down, then you bounce back up. You can get those injury rates spiking a little
Yeah,
bit. So,
yeah,
um, not that when we try and build into winter, that the running's the one that I try and be a bit more careful with, um, to increase people gradually. But
yeah.
yeah, that is still the one that's a bit of a pinch point.
Yeah. And then the other thing that goes along with that that I tend to consider is if I've got clients who have been mentioning various niggles and injuries, quite particularly quite recently, this is a great time for them to prioritize the treatment of that because they can have a bit more time in the schedule to go and seek out a sports massage or seek out a physio. They can have a bit more time to do some remedial exercises because we're not promoting high volume and the training sessions are not as important right now. So it's a real good time with the lowering of the volume and the stress that they can actually try to get any niggles and problems sorted now, and prioritize the rehab. And I think that works really well at this time of year because it could still give somebody a focus to what they're doing, but it's not fitness focus. It's not just getting fitter that they're working on. So I do try and push them to get those niggles sorted, and if that means doing a bit of strength training and whatever else, we try and prioritize that.
Yeah, yeah, and I think now is actually a good time to fit in. As you probably get into sort of November, December, January, those strength training sessions will probably focus a bit more on, maybe a bit more heavy weights, or
Yeah,
where you wouldn't maybe do that going into race season, actually looking after yourself with, like you said, physiotherapy or
yeah,
S&C, and just looking at that and going, how can I make you more robust to go into the winter and then
yeah.
into the race season.
Yeah. So that's something I definitely wanted to cover mainly now because it's probably part of the biggest area we should chat through is when we talk about off season or winter or whatever, and we talk about building a base or the base period. I think one of the common misconceptions is that that just means an aerobic base. It means doing lots of mileage, lots of long, slow distance or low heart rate or whatever you want to term it as. And for some people, there might definitely be an element of that if they are relatively new to endurance sports, etc., etc. But for me, base means preparing the body, the mind, and everything else for the season to come, and that could be strength training. That might be something that is going to make them more robust and improve performances next year. It could involve some intensity. For some people, it could involve a lot of intensity if the goal is Ironman, or
Yeah.
something where in the spring and in the summer we're going to push out the volume and the distance massively. That doesn't give us a lot of time during the week and a lot of recovery capacity for them to tolerate lots of intensity at the same time. So actually, we might consider reverse periodization for people
Yeah.
in that situation. So base things to consider is, for me, let's start with strength training. We obviously try to advise people to do some of it. We can write it for home, and we can give them basic stuff they could do at home. We could write it if they've only got a kettlebell or something like that and a couple of dumbbells. And obviously we can write plans for people who've got full gym access and can do a whole variety of different things. I in the most just want people to be quite holistic with what they do. It's not, for a lot of them, it's not massively sport specific. It doesn't have to be like strength training to improve your running or strength training to
Yeah.
improve your cycling. It's just how can we make you a bit more muscular, a bit more robust, and get the metabolic benefits of more muscle mass and all this sort of stuff. So I quite like to give them an overview, a whole body workout that has 5 components: a core movement, a hinging movement, a pull, a push, and a squat. And then it could be anything within, as long as there's one exercise from each of those categories. Um, we can make it a bit more technical, and they could have a vertical push and a horizontal push, and they can have a vertical pull and a horizontal pull, and that would definitely cover everything. And then you've got 7 categories, but it's just having something that will give them overall muscular sort of stimulation, and then improving their ability to do those movements. Like, so it's that this came up at the weekend, actually, physical literacy. It's just the
Mm.
ability to be able to move your body in space in the right way, and understand how your body's moving, and then we can progress the weights from.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. I think to add on that, like I think for me, a lot of it's around conditioning and control in the gym to be able to take out into the real world, which ultimately a lot of it is around being strong enough to handle the demands of the sport that you're doing, which, as we know, triathlon, the demands are quite high. Even if you what we sometimes we refer to people doing a low volume program where it's like 6 to 10 hours a week, but
Yeah,
it's still quite a lot. Like if you
yeah,
think you're doing 6 hours of football a week, that
yeah,
somebody look at you and go, "Blimey, that's quite a lot."
yeah, yeah,
Um, in our world, we go, "Well, that's not a massive amount." So when people are doing 10 plus to 20
yeah,
hours, like it's a lot of hours to be able to for your body to handle. And I think the S&C just fundamentally helps you keep in one piece and be strong enough and
yeah.
conditioned enough to be able to handle all that. So I think that for me is probably the most important aspect of S&C.
Yeah. And then obviously that would perhaps develop when we move into season, because then we might be a bit more specific with the strength work. It might drop down a little bit, but it might then be more focused to things like posterior chain and how that can
Yeah,
help running. And, we can then be a little bit more specific with what we're providing, because we're then looking for more specific exercise for performance benefits and to facilitate the three disciplines of
yeah,
triathlon. But again, the base has to be, are you just strong enough? Have you actually got some muscle? can
yeah,
can you do a basic squat pattern of movement? Because there's no point giving something like a Bulgarian split squat or something more difficult if they can't even do a simple goblet squat with a kettlebell or something.
yeah.
So yeah, so that's part of the base, isn't it? Definitely. Um, what about aerobic base then? Because obviously the problem with the UK winter is that the weather's pretty bad. We've got lots of darkness and not very many daylight hours, particularly for people working 9 to 5. So it doesn't really suit a high volume approach, does it, in the UK?
No, no, and the way I would look at it, I'd almost go like the fundamentals of winter, and I'd almost break it down and go, for me, I think the frequency of sessions is the most important thing. Um, then probably volume, and then probably intensity.
Yeah,
So actually, if you can fit in, you know, 10 short sessions, I
yeah,
think that's better than just packing it all in high volume or high intensity. So that's the way I would look at it. And I think that does fit in with how we train in the UK and
yeah,
the group environment that we put on. We have sessions that we can do, Tuesday and a Thursday bike sessions. They're in hour 15, which you say isn't massive volume, but if you're adding other bits and the
yeah,
frequency of sessions becomes quite high. And I do actually think that's probably the most important thing to look at is like how many sessions you are. And even if the total volume's not massive, well, that's not the be all and end all. It's actually how many sessions are you fitting in the week. And even if they're, between 30 minutes and 75 minutes,
yeah.
um, you've got a lot of frequency of sessions to be able to put together. And I think that's probably the key bit of winter to look at.
Yeah, yeah. And then obviously like for maintaining some volume at weekends, we can obviously use technology and go indoors, and even though that sometimes isn't as enjoyable as getting out for a coffee ride on your bike and stuff, we can try and put the community things in place so that people can be encouraged. I know if I was attending like an arranged meetup on the bike at 9 a.m. on a Saturday morning, there's more chance of me staying on for 3 hours or so than if I was on my own and kind of making it up as I go along and maybe listening to music or trying to, listen to a podcast or something like that. Unless that was a very interesting kind of podcast. By
Yeah,
90 minutes, you're starting to look for excuses as
yeah,
to
yeah,
why
yeah,
jump off. And I think that's the other thing that we do try to leverage, particularly in the winter, is the group dynamics. So the community, the coach sessions, the accountability of like making arrangements to be online and meet up at a certain time. And it's not that we want to put pressure on people, but by making arrangements, people are more likely to turn up and do it. And that way, if you're left to your own devices, you might be, procrastinate a bit more, and then you might cut the workout down a bit because you don't really want to stay on the bike for that long, or you left it a bit late in the evening. So I think all those community angles that we try to push are more beneficial in this off season when racing doesn't motivate people. There aren't that many people really, really like worried about a race right now. So they're not being driven to train out of anxiety because a race is coming up. They're a bit more relaxed, but that way training can then go on the back burner. And if we can find other reasons for them to turn up to sessions, like, oh, I get to meet such and chat to such, and we get the group, or I get to, ask the coach a few questions because this has been doing my head in and I can't remember.
Yeah, yeah.
All of those things helps us to get people through the winter. Probably more than people recognize as well, actually.
Yeah, yeah, and if you can keep turning up to those sessions, the frequency, if you think of the
Yeah,
whole sessions within the winter and you just keep turning up to them, and even if they're relatively short, and even if you're only fitting 90 minutes on a Saturday morning, but it's productive, then that's going to make such a difference when
yeah,
it comes to summer. The more you just keep putting off and missing, the more you just end up playing catch up.
yeah,
What one of the things that I always try to say to my athletes, and there's a famous quote from Seb Coe, is that medals are collected in the winter. Sorry, medals are you train to for medals in the winter, and then you collect them in the summer, basically.
yeah, yeah,
So yeah, the hard work, although perceive it's not really hard work, but the base work to
yeah.
set you up for the summer, fundamentally is probably the most important thing of endurance training. And if you miss that bit and then just try and play catch up, well, you never end up sort of
No,
getting there.
no, no. And I suppose one of the things that we would tend to encourage at this time of year, because it just works quite well, is getting off road and getting out into nature a bit more. We don't need to be measuring pace and effort level quite so closely. So it could be a good time to do some trail running or a few hill reps. Could be a good time to go out on a gravel bike or do a cyclocross race, or again a cross country league. It just those things that are a little bit less controllable,
Yeah.
but they can be very enjoyable without all the worry about data. And again, it's a different type of stimulus, isn't it? We can be using the terrain to help strengthen the muscles and the fascia and the tissues. We can use a little bit of competition from the racing and these sorts of things. But just if we've ridden and ran on tarmac all year because our racing has revolved around that, it's just a great time to embrace something just a little bit. It's still running and it's still cycling, but it's a little bit different, which will provide some different stimulus. Um,
Oh, definitely. Yeah, and I actually think, especially with the program that we run, I actually think that, if you can race once a month in the winter, whether that be a cross country or, cyclocross or,
yeah,
or whatever it is, that I think that gives you basically just a pure LT2 session,
yeah,
which is
yeah,
so hard to emulate in training because you'd write it and you'd be like, oh my God, this is
yeah,
just
yeah.
so hard. And you'd just be like, people would hate it. But actually, when you turn up to do a race, it never feels like
No,
that.
no,
But I think it gives you a really good stimulus. Obviously, if you do it every week, then that's not the stimulus that you want. But if you could do it like once a month, once every 6 weeks, added on to what we do, I think that makes such a huge difference. One, to people's motivation,
yeah,
and two, to their physiology. I think that does
yeah.
give them a boost.
What do you think about like goal setting and motivation at this time of year? What do you think um, goals should revolve around?
I think people need to have goals, otherwise their motivation can wane
Yeah,
pretty quick. I think this time of year is when I try and start thinking about like what are your aims and goals for the season? What does that look like? What races are you thinking of entering? The dates might not be out yet,
yeah,
but
yeah,
you can have a decent idea of like what you want to achieve. And that I think then helps the coach hold you accountable, but then also set a program that will allow you to sort of be at your best shape to achieve those goals. So I do think that is an important part of this time of year. Maybe not exactly now, but definitely before Christmas. I think if you could sort of as an athlete outline, what races
yeah,
you want to do, what is your key race, what are the other bit of races that you want to do around that, and almost chat that through with
yeah.
your coach to go, is this a good idea? And almost bounce ideas off each other. Um, I do think that's a big fundamental part of what winter looks like.
Yeah, just I know we talk about the one thing I wanted to come on to, and this might link to goal setting actually, is the fact that come the off season now around November time, it's well, I think it's a good idea to do some testing.
Yeah,
Most of the time when we test, the result we want is to show that we are fitter, that we are better than ever, that we're hitting numbers we've never hit before, and therefore we get loads of confidence that training is going the right way and that racing is going to be brilliant this season. However, I think that the counselling and the advice that we need to give at this time of year is we're not looking for that. We want you to do your best on the tests, so it's representative of who you are right now. But we're not looking for you to beat what you hit in maybe June, as we tested you just going into the season, because we were peaking, you're massively motivated, the weather was better, etc., etc. I think that's a difficult one to get across to, but the reason that we like to do it is because even if we encourage people to train within zones and not to particular numbers, they still see an on-screen target, or they want to always be at the top of the zone. It's just human nature. So
yeah,
we could say we don't need to do testing in November, but instead of aiming for the top of your zones, I want you to always be at the bottom of your zones, because it's unlikely threshold will fluctuate by tons, but it could maybe be 20 watts difference, let's say. Now, that's quite easy. It could be a little bit more, but with about a 20-watt difference, as long as you're somewhere near the middle to the bottom of the zone, you should still be in the zone. It won't, the training zones won't change that much, but human nature doesn't allow for that. People always want to be as good as they were, hit
yeah,
numbers they've always hit, or if it says stay within zone 4, the number you're aiming for is the number right at the top of zone 4, and that's where you want to be. And that's probably typical of triathlon, but I think it's human nature in general. So
yeah,
I don't think just asking people to use their current zones a little bit more sensibly and aim for the bottom actually works very well. So
yeah,
the reason I like to retest is then we can say, look, this is where you are right now. I don't care that it's 10 watts down or 20 watts down, or your threshold pace is 5 seconds a kilometer slower. It's all within the right ballpark. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change your zones on Training Peaks to reflect where you are now, and then you don't batter yourself to death all winter.
yeah,
Now, I think it's if we can get that across to people that it isn't failure to be lower, but we've got to be in a bit of a trough in order to have a peak in the summer, then I think we're doing our job really well.
yeah,
And I think the
yeah.
testing is very useful. The problem comes, I think, is if we don't get that across and we just test people, I think we would have a lot of issues with unhappy clients and people feeling that training now isn't working and all these other things. Um,
Yeah, and you can't hold a peak all year. Like, and we do exactly the same with elite athletes. We always test them in November, pretty much, and without fail. I don't think I've ever seen anyone who's as high in the winter as they are in the summer. Like literally no one. So it happens. It's just basic human physiology. You can't hold a peak,
no,
otherwise it wouldn't be a peak.
no,
It
exactly.
just be constant, and that's just you wouldn't want that anyway. So always 100% of the time you are not as good on testing in November as you are in May, June.
Yeah,
Obviously, if you've been consistent all year, there are obviously anomalies to that. But if you're training all year, you generally are faster in the summer and not as fast in the winter because that's when the races
yeah,
are.
yeah,
So yeah, and I agree. If we're setting sessions and they're going, 10% too hard, then they're already a bit more burnt out by the time they get to spring, and everything you end up just being a worse athlete. So actually training a little bit slower and consistent, and not feeling like every session is just a slog, which is
yeah,
why we've designed the sessions the way they are in the winter, because they're not designed to be like that. Even though there is some fast components, ultimately the sessions aren't generally as hard in winter as they get approach the summer.
yeah.
But they could be if you've got your thresholds the wrong,
Yeah,
set them wrong.
exactly. Yeah, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to that in a couple of weeks' time. Hopefully, we can we can coach people through that and get some good, valuable data that then informs them over the winter and allows them each session then across the winter just becomes more enjoyable, more achievable. You're not struggling in every single session that we give, and therefore we're letting the fitness grow naturally, and hopefully the motivation will come with that. Because what I find is that once you've reset somebody's zones, and thresholds and the numbers, and they've got used to that. It probably only takes a couple of weeks. They don't stress about it then. They've just got a number, and if they hit the number in a session, they're happy. Whereas if they're constantly going on to a session and having to drop the target, drop the target, drop the target, they feel like they're failing because they're not hitting the target
Yeah,
that was
yeah,
originally there. But
definitely.
once the target is more appropriate and they hit it, then they're happy.
Yeah.
But that means we've got to reset the zones to start with. So, yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what you often find is that, in 6 weeks' time, people have jumped up a little bit
Yeah.
anyway. So, and actually going a little bit easier. Sometimes I do find like we've moved the threshold down. You've done all these sessions. In 8 weeks' time, you could have jumped up quite a bit,
Yeah.
and that's because you've been going. And even that the last few weeks, you might have been going too easy, but then you've still made this huge jump. Or it's because you've actually been underdoing stuff,
Yeah.
and there's an element of that I always when we're trying to design sessions, I'm like. I constantly go, do they need to go that hard? And actually
Yeah.
just underdoing stuff over time really gives them a big old boost. So when you want to go 100%, you can, and you do seem to be able to find a lot more out of yourself when you've actually been holding yourself back a little bit. It
Yeah.
sounds weird, but it's often the case that people make a big jump by doing sessions that maybe aren't quite as hard
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
even they should be.
Yeah, because recovery might be better, mightn't it, and quicker
Exactly.
and
Yeah.
more full.
Yeah.
And obviously it's the recovery where we get fitter. That's the bit where your body makes the changes that it needs to make.
Yeah.
Whereas just going a little bit too hard, a little bit too often, a little bit too much stress, you might still get fitter, but if the recovery is never full, you're probably not hitting the ceiling that you could do, but you won't know because we're all driven to do extra and keep going and keep pushing. And it's only if we readjust and have a winter where we're not quite as stressed that maybe actually some extra gains come, and we might learn from that then and say,
Yeah.
well, yeah. Because I remember obviously coaching the sessions throughout the winter. When we first start people off with the LT1 bike sessions, the total interval time is often less than when we do some of the key LT2 sessions in the spring and summer. And
Yeah.
it just shows how much we've progressed because, let's say it was 5 by 10 minutes at LT1 or 10 minutes is LT1 in the winter. Well, quite often we're doing that. We're doing 5 or 6 by 10 minutes at
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
LT2 in the summer. But had we have tried to do that all through the winter, people would have been so stressed and so
Yeah.
stagnant in their fitness. But it just shows you. I highlighted that on a few of the bike sessions that I was coaching. Is that now, and this was like in June or July, we're now hitting numbers way above what we did in the winter, and actually it feels kind of similar. It doesn't feel that much harder because we've progressed gradually through months and months of quality training. Yeah, interesting one that.
Yeah. No. No. Definitely. Definitely. And you always get like we say you're not as fit in the winter as you are in the summer, but really what you want to see is that if you looked at a graph over time, is that you're going up in the summer, down a bit in the winter, up, down, up. So you
Yeah,
constantly, if you drew a line through, you're actually going up all the time, and almost
yeah,
the best way of comparing yourself is like, what was I like? And this is what I do with a lot of the elite athletes I coach. Okay, you've done a test in November. What were you like last November, and
yeah,
what were you like November before then? Don't compare summers.
yes,
Almost go like summer to winter. You can go summer to summer, winter to winter.
yeah,
Okay, well, what does that look like? And it's so hard to compare the winter summer thing. But if you compare winters, you'd like to see a bit of an upward trend.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah, compare like for like, and yeah. Anything else base wise? Is there anything else that you consider over the winter time?
Um, no, not really. I think the one thing that I have noticed from coaching age group is the last 8+ years, more nearly 10 years, is that December is often the hardest month
Yeah,
to do a lot of the fit in a lot of sessions. There's always social things going with work. There's always family stuff, etc., etc. So I often try not get people to not really stress about that too much. If you can. get a good amount of work in November and then January, and as long as you're doing
Yeah,
something in that
yeah,
December period, if you are going out and drinking a bit more than you'd normally do, that's absolutely fine. But you can't then do the same amount of training. Otherwise, you're more likely to get ill, you're more likely to get
yeah,
injured, and you're more likely to suffer a bit of burnout. So it's then just working with your coach and going, well, I am doing this social activity. And actually, for me, I go, well, just have the day off after.
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
actually, you're going to be more recovered if you are doing this social rather than doing a big night out and
yeah,
then going and do an hour and a half run. You're like, oh my God, that's just
yeah.
it could be a disaster in a few weeks' time. So, um, yeah, it's just how you sort of balance that.
Not
I
fit.
think.
I think we have a big role to play in that way as coaches because although you could say, or an athlete should be thinking, I shouldn't feel guilty about missing a session, because the coach has put it in the plan and they're now accountable to that being
Yeah,
there, even if they know they probably shouldn't do it, because it's sitting there and they can see it and it was programmed because then a coach or somebody with some knowledge has said that would be the best session for you to do this week, but then they know they can't do it or shouldn't do it. It is back to us again in a lot of cases for us to say, no, that's okay. Like this was planned a week or more ago. A plan is very useful, but the plan needs to be adaptable. It is a plan, but because we've got to be aiming for something and moving somewhere and recording what we're doing and how we're doing it. But at the end of the day, you've changed in 6 days since I wrote that plan. So now we've got to readjust it. And
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
didn't know you're going to have a night out. So had I known you were having a night out and coming home at 2 in the morning or whatever on this one occasion, I wouldn't have put that session there. That just
No.
I wouldn't have done it. I'd probably give you the day off and said, just recover, hydrate well, take some paracetamol,
Yeah,
and come back tomorrow.
yeah,
And
yeah,
then once
definitely.
you've said that, or hidden the session even, or deleted the session if it needs to, then I think we can then get clients and people to just buy into it a little bit more because we've sanctioned it. And there is, no matter what we do within coaching, I think we do have to accept that there is that dynamic that you've got to sometimes just give permission for people to be more relaxed. And
Yeah.
and it's nice to do that. Um, Otherwise, they do feel a little bit stressed that every day of the week there's a session. There's another. I've got to hit it. I've got to hit it. Now, in the spring and the summer, I think that little bit of pressure is good. Uh,
Yeah.
but in, like you say, in December, when they've got presents to buy and family stuff and meals everywhere and end of season parties,
Yeah, yeah. It's just
we have to accept that you shouldn't ever feel guilty about missing stuff in December.
no, no, no. And it's still surprising how much you can actually, fit in. And even if, your normal is like 12 hours a week, if you can do 6 hours a week in
Yeah,
December, well, that's far better than doing nothing. And actually, if you can just maintain that and then you can hit, then get into January, February, you're in a much better position.
yeah,
Um, Whereas if you try and maintain, your normal hours and then you're going out a lot, the amount of illness you see at that time of year as
yeah,
well. So,
yeah,
um, yeah, I often try and get my athletes to put on like any sort of social stuff that they do on Training Peaks
yeah,
in advance, so I can just look at it and go, right, well, we're not doing, I don't even, you always have that discussion where you put it on and then you have to change it. It's
yeah,
like
yeah.
try and put it on like you would do a race. So, because you taper for a race and you cover from a race, although going out's not quite the same, but
No, no.
you still need to recover from it. And I think that's something that often isn't taken into
Yeah.
account in your.
Especially when they've perhaps passed up some of these social opportunities in the summer just because they're so driven to do an Ironman or a big race goal that they feel like, oh, such and such is going out for a meal, or there's an office party, or I can't really go to that because I've got a big ride in the morning. And obviously, that is kind of necessary at one part of the season because they've invested a lot in these huge goals. But right now we need to allow them to flip things a little bit and go, yeah, but you've missed out on the social, you've missed out on part of your life to achieve what you wanted, and you can still have that again next year, but right now let's put things back in a different order and allow you to do some stuff that you've not been able to. And then
Yeah,
I think obviously the plus to that is that they come back more invigorated. They've got a
yeah,
better balance in life. Everything's much more balanced, and I think they're more likely to stay on coaching for year after year
yeah.
because we're not just battering them week after week.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I've found over the years is like, yeah, if you can just help people to stay in control through the winter and tick off the sessions that they'd
Yeah.
need to and the frequency, but actually like take some recovery and some downtime within that. And it goes back to like, if you're having 2 weeks off, and this is where actually I'm like, well, do you have it straight after a race, or do you have it in that December period?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I've not really got a right answer, but I think it's just that is individual and go, okay, well, my December looks pretty busy. Maybe I'll just take a few weeks off
Yeah.
there. And
Yeah.
yeah, it depends on the individual person, but it's
Yeah.
worth that conversation.
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point. And then obviously everybody likes to start afresh on the 1st of January or the beginning of January,
Yeah.
all the New Year's resolutions and everything else. It's nice to sort of get stuck in and get started then. Um, so we don't have too many problems, do we? Actually getting people motivated from January on.
No, no, generally not. No, that's usually where, but it's holding people back generally is the one there, especially if they've not done masses in that November,
Yeah,
December period. But yeah,
cool.
yeah,
That's good.
yeah.
Yeah, that's good. I think that's everything, Rob. I've not got anything else. That's
No, no, no.